Good morning, Fairfield Baptist. How are you guys?
Good morning.
Did you sleep well?
Yes.
You know what? I slept really well. That is after the guy upstairs finished running his marathon.
That was Alan.
I slept really well. It was about 11 o'clock at night. I don't know what happened, but I guess 26.2 miles finished up and he was done. And he went to bed and I said, hey, that's nice. So I opened the door and allowed the sounds to kind of come in. I was on the second floor, so I was kind of assumed that I was okay, that nothing was going to climb in. Could I have had something climb in? Was there something? You did too? Okay, good, good. So I opened the door and it didn't have a screen, which scared me a little bit, but I know why people buy those sound machines now.
Yeah.
Wow, that was extremely soothing. I'm going to have to go home and get a sound machine just so I can get some sleep. Man. Hey, last night I told you, that I had 5 kids and my wife and all that good stuff. I told you I usually bring a picture, but I didn't have a picture at that particular moment, mostly because it was my fault. I didn't pass that along to Ryan, but Ryan put it in for me, and I told you last night that I'd asked my daughter to give me a picture, to send me a picture of all of us doing kind of a selfie. So she did. She just picked a picture. She looked in there and found the one, and the one that she picked and that she sent to me had like an extra kid in there. So let's look at this here. So do you see the extra kid? Yeah, there's Becky Sue. I love that girl. So last night we started the Shine Conference, and basically what we did is we took a look. Oh, I gotta do that Shine Conference, right? We gotta do some jazz hands, right? And we took a look at the theme verse, and I want to read the theme verse real quick, just so that we kind of get our minds wrapped around that. And I'm going to add the then in that. So I'm going to put that there because I feel like that's important for where we're going here. Philippians chapter 2, verse 16, it says, "Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life." And what we discovered last night is that the then is really an if-then, right? If you've ever done any programming earlier, computer programming earlier, nowadays I can't even speak the language of computer programmers, but early on, back with Commodore 64s, anybody know? You guys are old, I just want you to know. It was, you would program, it was if this, then that, right? It was an if then. So basically, Paul says that then you will shine. And the if that he's talking about is that when you become like Christ, when you put on the mind of Christ, when you settle into the mind of Christ. And basically what he's saying, and this is so cool, and I was thinking about it this morning as I was kind of looking over the notes and I was writing some stuff down, and I got to thinking that there was just a line that kept hitting me again and again and again. When we allow what God has done for us begin to happen in us, then we will become like Christ in a world that is nothing like Christ, so that they may become like Christ. Now, that was crazy, right? Right? I know. I said it somewhere along the way. You said, okay, I don't know what he's saying, but I'll pick it up somewhere later on. But the reality is, when you allow what Christ has done for us, now just think about that for a moment. What has Jesus done for you? I tell you what, let's do this. Because this is a small group, and we can do this, and you didn't necessarily show up here just to listen to me. No, you probably did. You probably said, I don't want to participate in any messages, right? I can see some of your eyes. You're going, please, please, please don't call on me. But just real quick, shout out some things that Christ has done for you. What has he done for you?
Provides.
Provides, okay?
He saved me.
Saved me, yes, yes.
Give me peace.
Gave you peace in the midst of turmoil. All right, anybody else?
Remains faithful.
Faithful. He is faithful. He is that rock that stays solid.
He's chosen me to spend eternity with.
Chosen you to spend eternity with, okay? All right? Anybody else?
He's washed me clean.
Washed me clean. I love that. There's some things that you guys, and I know that you know this, and I know, but you haven't really hit there. He's forgiven you, right? I mean, we talked about saved you, but he's forgiven you. He's shown you mercy. He's shown you grace, right? When you allow those things that he has done for you begin to happen in you, or to begin to happen to you. And listen, I've been a Christian for, I don't know, 30 some odd years. Some of you maybe have that beat, some of you don't. I don't know exactly where that line is. But I tell you this, there's a lot of things in my life that I know knowledge-wise that Christ has done for me, but I don't always live it, right? And I've pastored now for 30 years, and I know that there's a lot of people that are exactly like that. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of people that I know, they know what Jesus has done for them. If they were to meet somebody on the road and they were to talk with them and somebody was downtrodden and having a difficult time with life, they could explain what Jesus has done and what Jesus can't do in their lives, right? But when it comes to actually living in forgiveness, actually realizing that, you know what, I'm forgiven, that I don't have to any longer live in that shame and that guilt and that part of my life that was so much a part of me, right? Or to live in the grace that God has given you, to move forward and say, this is what God has provided, I'm going to do this. Or to live in the mercy that He's provided. Or to live in the love that He has provided. It is so hard for us to do. But the moment that we begin to say, to take what it is that He has done for us and allow Him to do it to us, then we become like Christ in a world that is nothing like Christ, so that they can become like Christ. And I think there in Philippians chapter 2, that's exactly what the Apostle Paul is saying. As a matter of fact, if I were to write a commentary, that's probably the way I would kind of span out the beginning part of Philippians chapter 2. I would say that it comes down to the fact that you will shine when you become like Christ, when you allow Him to wash over you, allow Him to do those incredible things in your life so that you can let other people see what it is that He can do for them. So today, what I want to do is I want to turn the corner, because yesterday we kind of looked at how Jesus glorified the Father and how we are to put on the mind of Christ. But today I want to take a look at the heart of God, or maybe better, the heart of Christ, which is the same, right? I mean, we know that Christ was God visiting us here. And the reason I want to do this is because I think that we misunderstand God's desire. And maybe not you. This is always so difficult, right? Being a guest speaker someplace is so difficult because you never know that you guys may be doing this and you may be really offended about what I'm about to say to you. You may say, wait a second, we've got this down. We know. Which, by the way, might be pride. Don't know. But I think that oftentimes we misunderstand God's desire. Or maybe a better way of putting it, we get things out of order. Because we know, and I run into so many Christians, that we know this. God desires holiness, and He desires righteousness. Right? And then what we do, listen, because He says when we hold out the word, or hold to the word of life, and in our minds we think, okay, that's holiness and righteousness, which that is a part of the story. So what we do is we hold out to the world around us this holiness and righteousness, and we call the world around us to the standard that they can't live. And we forget that the reality is that Jesus came first to seek and to save the lost so that they could be holy and righteous. Which, by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, you are not holy and righteous without Jesus. You're not. You do not hit the level without Jesus. Jesus had to come and provide that for us, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the heart of God, because I really think, and I love what the Lumen sisters did, man, and talking about the fact that God sees us differently. And let me rephrase that, because well, this is a Shine Conference. God sees the people you see differently than the way you see them. That's hard for me sometimes, right? Because I kind of feel like I got people figured out. I got you pigeonholed. I know where you belong. But the reality is that God sees them differently. God saw me differently. I wasn't raised in a Christian home. As a matter of fact, in some ways, you could say that I was raised in an anti-Christian home. I mean, it wasn't that we sought out Satan, but it was that we were very anti-religious, anti-Christ, right? I mean, I can remember those moments and times when I was just a little kid. I was 4 or 5 years old, and a knock at the door would come, and as a kid, you're so excited. Someone knocks at your door, and you run into the door, especially nowadays. It's Amazon, right? I mean, this is great stuff. Something's showing up. Back in those days, nobody really knocked at your door anyway, so it was like someone's knocking at the door, and you run to the door, and you get there before Mom just, don't open the door, like that. And Mom goes over the door, and she goes, get back, like that, kind of like I do with the dogs. And then she opens the door, and there's these two people standing there, right? And they kind of introduce themselves. Hi, we're so-and-so and so-and-so. We're from such and such Baptist church. And before they can get any more out, my mom slams the door in their face. So I can remember as a 5-year-old thinking, wow, if you're from church, you must be a bad person. All the church folks, those are bad folks. Because I know my mom, and I love my mom, and I trust my mom. And church folks just showed up, and she didn't want anything to do with them. Right? Now, part of the reason that my parents had such a difficult time, my dad, when he was 12, he lost his mom to cancer. His mom was just this godly woman. As a matter of fact, just a few years ago, I went back to Texas, to Plainview, Texas, and I went to the little church that she was a part of. And here, even now, like 50, 60 years ago, there's a prayer room that's dedicated to her, to Caddel. It's just amazing to be able to walk in there and to pray in this room that was dedicated to her. So she was such a godly woman. And yet, she died of cancer when my dad was 12. And because of that, I don't know if it's because of that, but part of the reason is that my dad has been really angry with God. And then my mom, she grew up and she went to boarding school, Catholic boarding school. Which, man, they have a great picture of God, right? Yeah, them and rulers, So in her mind, God was always an angry God. So I grew up in this setting where religion was not a part of us, Christ was not a part of this. Doing good was the right thing. I mean, we were taught right and wrong, but there was still this sense of selfishness and self-centeredness. And there was, I kind of grew up that way. So by the time I made it to high school, man, I was just a self-centered jerk. I was a user, really. As I look back, I kind of think that I just used people to get whatever it is that I wanted to get. There was one point that I had a teacher, I would just push people. You probably know people like that. They just push you. Maybe you're kind of like that. But just push and push and push, right? I pushed a teacher to the point where he actually assaulted me. He got in trouble. I know, isn't that incredible? I mean, not his fault. It was my fault. Trust me. I sat there in the principal's office and they were saying, well, we're going to have to write this up. I said, no, really, I did it. It was me. I had another teacher kick a desk at me. I had another teacher tell the girl that I was dating, hey, you really should break up with that guy. He's a jerk. That's just to give you a little picture of who I was, right? I mean, I was just a bad guy.
So sweet.
Yes. And then I met a gal. She was a cute little gal. And I kind of took a liking to her, and I started hanging out with her. We started talking a little bit, and then she told me one day, she says, well, I go to church on the weekend. I said, oh, really? She said, yeah. She says, would you like to go? I said, if it means that I get to see you, yeah, I'd love to go. So I started going to church there. It was amazing, this little church. As a matter of fact, as I look at this congregation, this group of people, this reminds me of the church that I walked into. There's like 45 people in this little group, this little church, this little building. It was a long hall, kind of like this and everything else. And when I showed up, the people there, they accepted me. It was the weirdest thing in the world. I mean, every adult, it was like they could see through me immediately, and they just said, oh, there's a jerk. Right? But they accepted me. And they loved me. And they started asking questions about me. That's a weird thing. I've never had adults ask me questions. Who are you? Where are you from? What's going on? Where's your family? What's going on? All these things. I was interesting to somebody. So then I went back. And then I went back. And I started going to church, not because I was going to church to see her, but I started going to church because I liked what it was that I was seeing and what it is that I was feeling. And that pastor was so faithful in presenting the gospel consistently. Until finally one day, matter of fact, I was at a youth conference in Las Vegas, and on the 17th floor, well, let me back up a little bit. The youth conference, the pastor got up and he was preaching and speaking, and he gave the invitation, back when we gave invitations, because I guess we don't do that anymore, but he gave the invitation, and I remember sitting off to the side over there, right over there in the corner, and he said, okay, we're going to just sing 2 more verses. Back when we just did 2 more verses too. Remember that whole thing? 2 more verses, folks! We're going to close this thing down. And I remember holding on to the pew with all of my might and thinking, I can hold out for 2 more verses. I can do this. So I held on, and 2 verses went by. Walked out the door, got in the van, we went back to the hotel. I was on the 17th floor. My friend said, hey, we're going to go down to the arcade. We're going to hang out. We're going to play asteroids and all that good stuff and things like that. And I said, no, I'm going to stay here. So I went down the hallway to the girl who was the youth leader. And I knocked on her door. She opened the door. It was here, just streaming down my face. I said, I got to know this Jesus. She said, okay. So she invited me in, and right there on the balcony, 17th floor in the casino, hotel and casino in Las Vegas, they gave my life to Christ. And I went back to church. Now listen, there was something different in me at that point. It was amazing. I went back to church, and I remember things were different. I was looking around at people, and I began to think, I want a family like his family. I want to be a husband like him. I want to be a daddy like him. You see what I mean? I mean, they began to become examples. because they were living out. They were holding true to the Word of God, but they were also holding it out for me to see so that I would begin to say, that's what I want to be like. That's what I want to be like. See, I think that we get things turned around. When we talk about evangelism, we talk about let's go out and find people like us, people that believe like us, and then we'll bring them in and they can become a part of us. And see, that's not what Jesus did. Jesus went out and found people that were nothing like him. Right? I love what Andy Stanley says. Andy Stanley says Jesus liked people that were nothing like him, and people that were nothing like him liked Jesus. And I often wonder to myself, is that true of the church today? Does the church like people that are nothing like them, and do people nothing like the church love the church? So today what I want to do is I want to take a look at a passage or an event that happens in the life of Christ. This is in Luke chapter 7. We're going to begin in verse 36. And I want us to understand that God just doesn't see people the way that we see people. See, the people in the room, this is what you're thinking. But I need you to know that people outside of this room, this is what they think. They want to know, is God a loving God or is God an angry God? Does he know me? Does he see me? Does he care for me? Does he love me? Or is it true what people say? That my life choices and lifestyle make me unwanted by God. So Luke chapter 7, we're going to begin in verse 36. It says, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Now this is amazing when you think about it, because the Pharisees, they were the religious leaders. They were the church folks. They were the pastors in a lot of ways of the church that was known at that moment, at that time, right? And very seldom did they want anything to do with Jesus. As a matter of fact, the only time that they wanted anything to do with Jesus was so that they could trap Jesus, so that they could somehow bring him in, they could get him talking. And you know, sometimes when we get to talking, we say something that we shouldn't have said, right? I've done that every message I've ever preached. I have someone come up to me and say, hey, let me just kind of explain to you that you said, you know, I'm going, oh, yeah, you're right, I probably said that the wrong way too. But they were trying to trip Jesus up. They were trying to trap him. They didn't want anything to do with Jesus. But here's the amazing thing, and this is what I love. Jesus accepts this invitation. Let that sink in for a moment. I'm not sure how often the church responds in this way, and we as church people, when we know that somebody is against us and somebody's just looking to trip us up, somebody's just looking to make a fool of us, and they say, hey, why don't you come over to our situation and explain to us what it is that you believe, and you know they just want to trap you. And yet Jesus shows up. Jesus goes where it is that he knows these people are against me, and I'm still willing to go. That's an amazing picture. I love that. And while he was reclining at the table, while they were reclining at the table, verse 37, a woman in the town who had lived a sinful life, which was a polite way of saying that she was a prostitute, learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. Now, get the picture here. Jesus and Simon are enjoying a meal. And at this time, houses weren't like our houses, where it's all closed up and buttoned up, and you go behind the closed door and you close it, and nobody knows what's going on. At this time, houses were much closer. They were open air very often. In other words, windows were open. And if there was some event that was happening, if they were going to be talking about some political thing, some controversial thing, or something religious or something like that, let's say that there was a great teacher who was in town like Jesus, and somebody would invite him over to the house, everybody showed up. Now, they wouldn't necessarily be allowed into the house, especially a Pharisee's house. But they would show up and they would be on the outside of the house, kind of looking into the windows, trying to hear, what did he say? What did he say? What's going on? What happened now, right? So that's what's going on. So everybody's gathered around the house and everybody's listening. And in the midst of this woman pushes her way through and makes her way into the door at a great risk to herself, especially since it's a Pharisee's house. This man could make her life miserable. And yet she pushes through. Why? Because she had to. Most scholars believe that Jesus and this woman had some sort of encounter prior. In other words, it wasn't something that she just did. It was something that somewhere along the way, it could have been just a look. I really believe that. I believe that Jesus had that way of looking at people and making people feel like, oh my goodness, you know everything about me and you love me. Right? Wouldn't it be so cool to just look in the eyes of Jesus? I would love that, just for a moment. Well, maybe I would. Now that I think about all the things that he would know, I might be a little bit nervous about some of that. But I know that he would turn the corner and he would say, "But I love you." Right? So this woman had experienced something in the midst of that. And she shows up in the house. She shows up at the house and she enters into the house with no fear. Which the Apostle John, he would later say, I love this, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Because fear has to do with punishment. And the one who fears has not been made perfect in love. See, this woman had spent her life being and doing what others wanted for a fee. But Jesus showed up and he looked beyond what she did. He looked past her hurt. He looked past her shame. And he loved her. And he gave her something. And he expected nothing in return. That never happened in her life. Never. So she enters into the room. It says, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this. Oh, wait, let me go back up to 38. I jumped to 39. 38. It says, as she stood behind him, meaning Jesus, at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair and kissed them and poured perfume on them. And the perfume was a tool of her trade, right? Right? I mean, a lot of people, they think of this perfume as being, well, she made herself smell good. But the reality is that she made them smell better. Right? I mean, that's what this was used for. And she shows up and she takes this perfume and she begins to anoint Jesus' feet, which serves a twofold purpose. One, it says to Jesus that I am so thankful for who you are. I'm so overly generous. I love you because you love me, right? But it also says that I'm walking away from a lifestyle. She's saying, I'm done. I'm finished with this. I'm no longer going to live this lifestyle. But it also exposes Simon's heart. This is amazing. Verse 39 it says, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. See, I'm afraid, again, not Fairfield, but I'm afraid that the church too often looks at the people who walk in the door and we make some sort of judgment and we say, you know what, you will never. Right? 2 years after I gave my life to Christ, well actually it was 2 years after I graduated from high school, I went back, I was asked to be a part of the Christian club. And in order to be a part of the Christian club, you know, at that time, well, I think it's still that way too. You have to have a core group of people, students that you know call for some sort of Christian club. They ask for to be a part of the organization and stuff like that. So during lunchtime, they had these meetings, and they asked me because I was a youth leader at the time. They said, "Hey, would you come and be a part of this Christian club?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'd love to." So I go back to my old high school. And I enter into the wing where it was the English wing, and Mr. Nichols was there. And it was lunchtime, and he just happened to be in his class. And I remember as I was walking down the hallway, he noticed me, he saw me walk by, he gets out of his seat, he runs out to the door, and he opens the door, he says, "Hey, Caddel!" And I stopped and I said, "Yeah?" And I kind of thought he'd say, "Nice seeing you." He says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm here to go attend the Christian club." He laughed and said, "No, you're not." I said, "No, I am. I'm going to go do the Christian. I'm leading the Christian." "No, you're not. Get in my classroom." So I walked in the class and I sat in the chair that I had sat for 2 years taking English. And he called the office and he says, "I got Lance Caddel here. Is he supposed to be here?" I said, "Yeah, he's supposed to be there. He's a part of the Christian club." And he just looked at me and shook his head. And see, I think that sometimes, again, we as Christians are kind of like Simon here. If this man knew who it was who was washing his feet, he would have nothing to do with her. See, Simon not only believed that our choices and our lifestyle separated us from God, which they do, by the way. Our choices and our lifestyle, they separate us from God because God is a perfect God and we are imperfect. No one would argue that. But Simon also believed that our choices and our lifestyle made us unwanted by God. And Jesus proved him wrong. right? Look at this. Look at this. This is crazy. It says, verse 40, it says, and Jesus answered him, which I love. Because Simon said nothing. He thought it. See, some of you right now, you're thinking, this guy is crazy. He's nuts. He's going too long. I just want to go to lunch. But he knows what you're thinking. He'll tell me later on. But anyway, I'm kidding. He won't. But Jesus knew his thoughts. He said, Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither one of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? And Simon replied, I suppose the one who had bigger debt, the bigger debt to be forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus answered. In other words, Jesus is saying that when we are aware of our great need and it has been met, then that leads to great love in action. Verse 44. Then he turned to the woman and he said to Simon, I love this. He's looking at the woman, but he's talking to Simon. Do you see this woman? I came to your house and you did not give me any water for my feet. In other words, you didn't show any hospitality, which would be the way that you would greet somebody who was a guest in your home. But she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, which would have been a proper greeting at this moment, at this time, with any guest that would have walked into your room. But this woman, from the time that I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, and which would have shown honor. But she has poured perfume on my feet. Verse 37, therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. Now, I want you to note, her sins are not forgiven because she showed up and did something to earn forgiveness. Her sins had been forgiven, and she showed up and did something because she had been forgiven. See, when I gave my life to Christ and I showed up that very next Sunday, now I had experienced love of the congregation before. I had experienced love, acceptance of the congregation before. I had experienced a genuine, they wanted to know me. But when I showed up that next time and something had happened in my heart, all of a sudden there was a generosity that was overflowing inside of me, and I loved them back. Do you see that? And I loved my God, and I wanted to tell other people about my God. I remember sitting there in the front row, and we were singing, and then the pastor got up and he talked about Bible studies, and he says, listen, we've got Bible studies every single day of the week. And I looked over at my girlfriend and I said, I want to go to all those. And she looked at me like, you're nuts. Because we know, right, as Christians, it's kind of like, oh, you'll settle down. You'll settle down. I know you're excited to know more about Jesus right now, but you'll backslide to where the rest of us are. Right? And Jesus says, no. If you've been given much, then you will show much love. See, the thing that they had forgotten is that neither one of them, well, the thing that Simon had forgotten, is that neither one of them had the 500 denarii. Or the one with the 500 denarii, nor the one with 50 denarii had the means to pay. And they were both facing the same consequences, right? The one with the greatest debt had a clear understanding of what forgiveness meant. The one with the little debt thought, you know what, I think I can handle this, but I'll take your free gift. But if neither one of them could pay it back, which they couldn't, they would both go to debtor's prison. And the one with the greatest debt had a better understanding of how unworthy they were. This is why sometimes, boy, I got to figure out how to say this. I should have thought of how I was going to say this way before I got to this point. But this is why sometimes good people have a really difficult time seeing their need for Jesus. And I hate to say it, but we live like in America, and like everybody thinks that they're good. It's really weird, right? It's like, I'm good. Basically, I'm good. And they just have a hard time understanding how much they need Jesus. How, if really the accounts were called, they're not going to make it. And really, if your account was called without Jesus, you aren't going to make it. Right? But when they discover that God knows them intimately, loves them fully, and wants them completely, then they become passionate followers who love generously and serve Jesus. See, Simon's problem was that he thought he was better than he was. He didn't realize that both he and the sinful woman were exactly the same. Look at the way this ends. I love this. Verse 48. It says, "Then Jesus said to her, 'Your sins are forgiven.'" Now, don't miss this. Jesus isn't saying your sins are forgiven because of what you just did. Jesus is saying your sins are forgiven because of what I have done in your life. So if that's the thing, I mean, here she is. She's walked in the room. She's done this incredible thing. And he says, your sins are forgiven. Why would Jesus even make that proclamation? Why wouldn't Jesus just say, what she did is based upon what it is that I have already done for her? See, the reason that Jesus made the proclamation, because he wanted everybody to know that this sinful woman, this woman that you see as being somebody unworthy, I have made worthy. He makes a proclamation. Man, I can't help but wonder, how many times does God send us people and he says, listen, this is someone who's hurting, somebody who needs so badly. And they've got a shell and they won't let you know that they need. But will you love them? Will you care for them? Will you really, truly shine for them? And then verse 49. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Who's this guy? Only God can forgive sins, which is exactly, to see Jesus is to see God. And then verse 50. Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. That goes back to what you said. Saved. That word saved, this is beautiful. It means delivered. Your faith has delivered you. You know what that means? You know what Jesus is telling this woman? You no longer need to seek acceptance from anybody else. You no longer need to seek some sort of filling up from anybody else. I'm enough. I love that. So as we go back, right, we kind of go back because we talked about the mind of Christ. We need to have the mind of Christ. We need to allow what it is that Christ has done for us to happen in us so that we can ultimately become Christ in a world that is nothing like Christ. But also we need to have the heart of God, because if we do all of those things and we just hang out with people that are like us, then we do no good. But if we have the heart of God and we understand that God's heart is to forgive. See, Jesus came for the downcast, the outcast, and those in need of a cast. That's who Jesus came for. And everybody qualifies for that. Nobody is outside of that. Everybody. I said it last night, right? Everybody puts their head on their pillow, and at some point they think, oh man, I am so whatever. Right? Because that's who we are without Jesus. So as we come to the end here and we begin to think about, okay, what does this look like when we go into the world and we shine? You need to open your eyes to what it is that God's doing around you and who it is that he's bringing to you. And begin to ask him to show you with his eyes. Who's he bringing to you? Who needs to know? And then how is it that you can show them love? I don't know a whole lot about Fairfield, but I do know this. I watch you interact, just this group, and you guys love each other. It would be interesting. It would be interesting to have somebody come in the door who is nothing like you and see how you act with them. Because you've passed the one test. You love one another. But what does it look like when the woman in the street shows up? What does it look like when somebody from the LGBTQ community shows up? What's that look like? Because this was the worst of the worst in their community. Right? Well, you got a list of the worst in your community. What happens if they show up? Let me pray. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for today. Thank you, God, for your word. Lord, it makes us uncomfortable. God, it calls us to do things that are so difficult. And Lord, I pray that you would help us. As Paul says, help us to shine like stars in the sky in the midst of a corrupt generation. For we ask this in your precious name.